go. We're with my mate, Taylor Wales Ryan, aka the Sports Dietitian. Taylor's experience stems within the sports performance realm, where she has predominantly worked with strength and conditioning athletes from recreational to elite standards. Think CrossFit and Olympic lifting athletes. Taylor herself was an Olympic lifting competitor where she competed nationally, and that's where she began to understand the integral role that nutrition plays. She was even a fitness model, taking out the A&B Fitness Model Open in 2018. I have to see those pictures. Her clients include CrossFit athletes Royce Dunne, Jessica Coughlan, and Brandon Swan, and weightlifters Riley Porter, Mia Gaudry, and Matthew Leiderman. So she knows what she's doing, and that's why I wanted to chat with her today. Taylor, g'day.
Hi, how you going?
I'm good. Now, listen, I wanted to talk to you briefly about some personal things. Your house flooded. You had COVID within the last month. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true. I don't know if you got all your...
Tell me what's going on. Tell me how you are.
Yeah, good. Australia or Brisbane or Queensland got smashed with floods. We popped like what was equivalent of 6 months of rain in 3 days. So, and my property, where my clinic is got smashed. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's all fixed. Lucky my husband's a builder, so that was fine. But it was about, 1.5 meters of water. So.
Wow, that is crazy. And by the way, on a personal note, also, your husband is amazing. Real Bobby Dazzler.
Yeah.
What a special human.
Thank you. Yeah, he goes right.
Yeah, he does. I like it very much. So let's start really simple because I asked my mother-in-law what she wanted to ask you, and she goes, she's a dietitian. What's the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist? And I thought, that's a very good question. What is the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
So it's going to vary Australia compared to in America in terms of the standards, but a nutritionist is basically means that it's an unprotected term in Australia, so anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. So you have a degree that's like 6 weeks, or you can go to university still and do 3 years and be called an accredited nutritionist. And then a dietitian obviously is a 4 to 6 year degree at university, and it's a protected term, which means that no one can just call themselves a dietitian unless they have the degree and qualifications to do so. Dietetics deals with clinical nutrition, so technically we're able to work with, very severe diseases and medical nutrition therapy. Hence why you see most dietitians in hospitals, because that's predominantly clinical dietetics and medical nutrition therapy is where we're mostly found. And then you can obviously delve into the other realms where I talk the pathway of sports dietetics. So it's a little bit of a difference between the two, but more comes down to the fact that you can't necessarily just call yourself a dietitian without having the qualifications and proof of that too.
Well, I noticed on your website you're an accredited nutritionist and an accredited dietitian. Is that correct? Is that right?
Yes. So when you become a dietitian, you naturally are already qualified as a nutritionist because you've done the degree requirements, and then obviously dietetics is an extra 1 to 2 years, depending if you're doing masters or just the undergrad. So we can call ourselves both, essentially.
Got it. Okay, so everyone, are we all understanding Taylor's very smart?
No.
Let's all take a moment and realize Taylor, very, very intelligent person. We've got to listen to her. My first question about diet, like what to eat is, I always see these debates about eating, what you eat is about 50% important and then working out is 50%, or it might be like 80% what you eat and 20% the amount that you work out. What do you think the answer to that is? I know that's an incredibly general question, but what do you think the answer to that is?
To be honest, with individuals, it's going to depend on what their circumstances are. I like to say most of the time, 80% nutrition and 20% just soul foods, if that makes sense. And nutrition and training are just as important as each other. In saying that, though, I would argue, because it's obviously my area, that nutrition is more important than training, because without adequate fuel, it's hard to train at the levels that you require for the athletes that I deal with, if that makes sense. But it comes down to the individual and where they're at. If you're really shit with your nutrition, I'm not going to say that you need to be, 80% compliance, because you're not obviously at that behavioral stage where that's important. It's just small baby steps in the right direction. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, when you say really shit with nutrition, we're talking about people who don't know what to eat or how much of what, but they're trying to get good at a sport and trying to get in shape. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so think of it more like an individual. When I say that, they're not really good at their foundation nutrition, so their everyday nutrition. I think of it like a cupcake analogy. So, the batter of the cake is your everyday nutrition, and that's really important. And then the sprinkling or the icing is essentially like your 10%, which is the things such as, your pre-training, your supplements, and all that sort of stuff. So if people
Right.
are generally not really great at their nutrition, we're not going to be smashing them for the 10%, which is what they want. Most of the time, they don't care about this. They're going to go straight for the 10%. Whereas I'm taking a step back and be like, well, it's important for you to have overall foundation of nutrition is something we need to work on. So let's focus on that, because regardless, if you focus on that, your training is going to improve anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I came to follow you because I was following Australia's fittest man, CrossFit athlete Royce Dunne. He's such a beast. Yeah. And speaking of somebody who has to, I mean, you tell him what to eat. And speaking of somebody who has to make sure that their nutrition and what they're eating is down, like he works out multiple times a day. What is he eating? Like he's got the cupcake batter down, right?
Yeah.
What is he eating?
So Royce is roughly, depending on his training, he's going to be eating anywhere between 5 to 6,500 calories a day. So that's a lot when you're looking at as the most, most individuals are probably eating anywhere between 2,000 to, 2,800, as an everyday individual. So he's almost 3 times that amount. His diet, or maybe many don't know, would be mostly consisting of moderate to high carbohydrates. So he still has his good quality nutrition, his sound meals, like, your standard, chicken, rice, and vegetables, and however you want to make that for his main meals. His breakfast quite adequate, whether that's, smoothies and eggs and all that type of thing. The biggest difference between, I guess, Royce and an everyday athlete, and people are probably going to be like, I can't believe she's saying this, is predominantly most of his calories, or not most, some of his calories are going to be coming from processed foods. And the reason why is if you're trying to consume 5,000 to 6,000 calories and you're just trying to get that from sweet potato and rice, good luck, because you're then going to have the issue of you're not adequately fueling, because he simply cannot eat enough sweet potato or rice for the amount of carbs and calories overall that he needs. So in this instance, it's situationally appropriate for Royce to have processed foods and processed carbs, because it means he's going to be able to meet his calorie requirements. So because without that, it simply would be impossible for him to get those calories in, and then he's adequately under fueling, which means he then has a risk of his performance being compromised as well as his health, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that really does make sense. But I mean, we're talking about somebody who works out 3 hours a day, let's just say, and it's really.
Yeah, he probably sometimes he'll do double days and even triple sessions, but it could be anywhere between 3 to 6 hours a day.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So we're talking about somebody who moves a lot, and he needs to be fueling. It kind of reminds me what you're talking about is do you remember when Michael Phelps, when he talked about what he'd eat, and he'd eat like 3 pepperoni pizzas in a night and a 20-piece of chicken nuggets, and people were like, "Wait, what? You have abs?" And your body is your whole life. How are you eating that? It's like this processed foods are really good and helpful for people who work out as a job, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what people need to understand the difference. When like I think I did a post on this age ago, remember, and I got a bit slammed from just general population being like, I can't believe you promote this as a sports dietitian. But I'm like, context is key just with anything. Like, would I suggest that for an individual he's not even eating their 5 serves of vegetables and 2 serves of fruit? Hell no. Like, it's, it just comes down to the overall goal of that athlete, which is to perform at his optimization levels, and also to make sure that his health and well-being is there. So like I said, it's definitely suitable for him, but it's not what I would recommend for everyday individuals, not at all.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to mention throughout this conversation, because I'm going to be asking you questions for more everyday individuals rather than people who are working out 6 hours a day. I think everyone who's listening needs to understand where I'm coming from when I'm asking these questions. I'm talking about information that I think will be helpful for you. If you're a professional elite athlete, then I'm probably not talking to you, and all these questions that I'm asking are mostly not for you. We're talking to the average punters out there who want to work out for about an hour a day or more, depending on what your sport is. But I want to ask, what are the best ways to fuel up before demanding workouts? Let's think like the CrossFit workouts, HIIT workouts, strength workouts. What are the best ways to fuel up before those?
Yeah. So again, like what you said, it'll come down to the individual and their goals. I know I'm going to keep slamming this, and you're going to keep hearing me saying this. But if you're just an everyday gym goer who's like, oh, Tay, I just do it for the sake of it, I don't really care my outcome, then you may not necessarily need to come into that session with something fueled, because the food that you may have consumed prior throughout the day, hence your everyday nutrition, may be sound enough to support that workout. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So, your afternoon snack, for example, whether that might be an hour and a half, 2 hours prior, might be fine for that workout in the afternoon. Unless you're a person who's doing that hour session and you still have performance goals, because you can definitely be an everyday athlete and still want to hit, goals that are important to you, then that's when it would change and be like, okay, we're going to prioritize, training, nutrition to be a little bit more carb focused. So we're going to fuel you for the workout ahead. So, around that 60 minutes prior, we just want a small top up of carbohydrates. That amount will be dependent on how long you're working out for. If it's a 60-minute workout, you may not need that much. So serve of fruit and that sort of thing will be adequate, but it is predominantly carbohydrates that we're looking for. And the reason why is because, as you know, CrossFit, HIIT style training, all of that, is working above, 65% of your maximal VO2s max. So you're huffing and puffing essentially. So the food that we want for that is going to be carbs, because it can be broken down quickly and it can fuel you for the workout ahead, essentially.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. So let's get specific then, so let's just say a guy like me is going to go and do a CrossFit class. It's going to be a bunch of strength and then a whole bunch of strength and cardio thrown in, the way that CrossFit classes go, WODs and all that. The best way you're telling me is an hour before, make sure you eat a banana. That'll fuel you pretty well for an hour or so of hard workout.
Let's just say for you, because you're around about, let's just say, arguing 100 kilos. So if you're going to be more precise, and even sports nutrition, like I said, can be applied to all individuals, but even for yourself or someone who wants performance goals, it's around about 0.5 to 1 gram per kilogram body weight. The 1 gram, because you're like, well, that's 100 grams of carbs. You probably don't need it for that workout. It's just that range. So looking at 50 grams. So you could go for you, a banana and a piece of toast and a little bit of honey. Or you could go, raisin toast, or you could go dates. Those types of things are going to be adequately, enough for you for that session.
Yeah. And what are what's just a bad idea to eat before a workout?
Well, anything that's high fiber, because you probably find you'll shit yourself, because it won't sit very well in your stomach, or anything that's really high in fat. Not that fats are bad, fats are very useful. They're just not ideal for that session prior because of the intensity, and it takes long to digest. So anyone who's had a high fat meal, or for example, a handful of nuts or something, or too many nuts prior to training, might find that makes them get stitches and that sort of stuff. So whatever we're giving you for your training is not just to perform, but we want to make sure it's good for your gut, because the last thing you want, even if you have too much carbs or the wrong types of carbs that your body just doesn't digest, you're going to be having issues, where you need to run to the toilet, stitches, cramps, all those uncomfortable issues, which then just takes you away from the workout itself.
Would toast be considered a high fiber thing, or if it's with it, if it's 60 minutes before a workout, it'll have digested a little bit and be okay?
Yeah, it should be. And it come down to, on the type of bread you're consuming. So multigrain's fine. I wouldn't go with a heavy rye, for example, into it. And even white toast is also good. Again, if you're not really great with your foundation nutrition, I wouldn't suggest someone to go straight for, toast or white toast. As per se, nothing is anything wrong with it, but we just need to work on your better quality overall of your diet.
Yeah. So carbohydrates are a really good source of energy to fuel a workout. That's correct, yes. Right?
Yeah, that's it.
I found this absolutely fascinating when I worked with you. Just to clarify for everyone, I've worked with Taylor before when I wanted to put on weight, and I had no idea the role that carbohydrates would play. So Taylor sent me a meal plan, and it was it was 50%, maybe 60% carbohydrates, of which I'd been avoiding carbohydrates, usually just because I was keto-ish, carnivore-ish, paleo-ish, and all this. But it was so amazing to be hit with all this. With carb, she loves carbs. She thinks carbs are really important. And when you get into talking about elite athletes, they smash carbs. They need to fuel up on carbs. So do you view carbs as mostly a source of energy, and that's why they're important? Yeah,
and that's and also too, I think, like you said, I'm very much sitting on the fence with a lot of things, because you'll have two sides of the story. You have people who slam carbohydrates, who are saying, you shouldn't be eating, you shouldn't be consuming them. And you have people who say they are. The amount of carbohydrates that you need would be dependent on the individual, if that makes sense. But they are the main fuel source for moderate to high intensity. Hence why in my realm, you'll see that I'll always be promoting it. And just in general, because without carbs in your life, it's pretty depressing, right? So, And the reason why is because if you look at all the macronutrients, carbs and fats are the ones that are predominantly used most of the time with exercise. So without getting too complicated, the lower the intensity of the exercise, predominantly fat is being utilized, right? As the intensity increases, that's when carbs kick in and they become what your body prefers to utilize for that workout. So, hence CrossFit and high intensity sessions and all those types of things. So your body, hence why carbs can be broken down quicker and be utilized for energy. So that helps you with like less fatigue and hitting the wall, essentially. Your body simply can't do that with fats for that intensity. So, it can, but it's a very lengthy process. And it takes a long time. So I always say to people, why work harder when you can work smarter? Because your body's always going to try to find ways that's more efficient. So in the sport of CrossFit and strength conditioning and HIIT and all that sort of thing, we want to be fueling yourself adequately to make sure that you can get the best for performance optimization, regardless of whether you're, everyday athlete who's a little bit more serious, as in recreational, to elite standards. But I think the important aspect is, even if you're just an everyday gym goer, we still want to have carbs present in the diet. You just won't need as much as someone as yourself, or to the latter end, like Royce, for example.
Right, like an elite athlete versus me, who I essentially work out for the aesthetics of it in order to be able to look good on camera and as an actor. I want to clarify something that you said about fat. When you say burn fats, you're talking about the fat that you've eaten.
Yes. So there's this big, a lot of, analogies from people thinking that if I, fat burning, or when I train, I'm going to be burning more fat, and vice versa. So fat burning and fat loss are two totally different things. All right. So fat burning means fat oxidation, which means if you're on a high keto diet like yourself naturally kind of now, your main fuel source for your workouts is predominantly going to be fat, because that's your main source of food that you consume. That does not mean you're going to get lean, because the only way you're going to be able to get lean is by a calorie deficit. So fat burning and fat loss are two different physiological understandings, and people sometimes intertwine these incorrectly. Because if you're not fat, if I'm essentially eating more fat, I'm going to be burning more fat. If I'm eating more carbs, I'm going to be oxidizing more carbs. But if I want to be in a calorie deficit, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'm just going to be in a deficit. Does that make sense?
Right, yeah. It sounds like fat burning was, a phrase coined by keto enthusiasts to try and get people to go on keto and be like, it burns fat. It's like, yeah, because you eat fat, and when you exercise, you're going to be burning fat because there's nothing else that you're eating.
Yeah, if you're in a deficit of a keto diet, you will be losing fat because it's a deficit. It's not because you're eating more fat, essentially.
Right. It's funny, why weren't there two words, made for the term fat? Dietary fat and being fat. There should be two different words, bodily fat, they should be two different words. And so they've gotten very confused over time. So when we say fat loss and fat burning, we mean two different types of fat.
Yeah, and it's just because a lot of noise in the nutrition industry, right? So for an everyday person, and it's also unfair for them because they're just learning from that. So their knowledge deficit is quite, is there. So they're just like, but I'm just doing what I've been told. I'm like, yeah, but what you've been told is inaccurate, and they don't know the difference between what is true and what isn't. Do you know what I mean? So it can become very confusing.
That. I wanted to talk about the noise and the people yelling about keto, carnivore, and all this stuff, because it is interesting and there is a lot of noise, and we know now that people can't sustain keto, real true keto, for very long because it's so restrictive, and you can't just eat just cream cheese and butter and bacon. You'll drive yourself nuts just eating that. What are your thoughts on? I would love to hear your thoughts on keto and all that noise.
Yeah. So the thing with keto, particularly in, strength conditioning in general, actually, let's go back a little bit. So a keto diet was actually originally created for individuals who have epilepsy. So in my head, unless you have epilepsy, why the hell would you want to do a keto diet? Only because it can be, high fat, minimal carbohydrates, hardly any vegetables to some area. It's very restrictive. So the reason why it was originally created was because essentially less carbohydrates to the brain stimulus means that the individual is less likely to have seizures, right? So there is a medical application or intervention, sorry, with keto itself. So that's where it
Mhm.
originally stemmed from. And then you get these people who just latch onto this and be like, well, I'm going to utilize this and and put it in the diet culture and everyone's going to lose weight and it's amazing. And it's now crowned as like the be all and end all. The problem with keto and the reason why people see changes so quickly is because when you eliminate carbs, and you've done this too, and we've discussed how it's worked and that sort of stuff, is because carbs, again, this comes down to weight loss and fat loss, right? Carbs hold water. So when people say to me, oh, I've just started the keto diet, it's brilliant, I've lost like 4 kilos in a week. And I'm like, if we could lose 4 kilos in a week of fat, we wouldn't have a problem when it comes to losing fat in general. What you've done is you've just lost water weight and you would have lost some muscle because it essentially is a deficit, right? Providing you've created a deficit. Because for every gram of carb, we naturally hold 3 grams of water with it. Hence why when we start keto, we see that massive water weight drop. Keto can work for individuals if it's done in a way that's, education around how to make it work, how to make it sustainable, all that type of thing. Long-term sustainability, not the biggest advocate for it. And also long-term health implications because you are on a high-fat diet. And obviously we know high-fat diet, particularly with saturated fats, because the majority of the time that's what individuals are consuming. So, for example, meats, cream cheeses, all those types of things, does increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. So we do see sometimes with people who have keto diets that their cholesterol and all those types of things increase as well.
Got it. Yeah. So let's just say I want to be an elite CrossFitter. I'm pretty good at CrossFit. I've got lots of time now. I want to train as much as Royce does. But I come to you and I say, I'm keto. What do you say?
So it's hard because you never want to make an individual feel, and I never would, feel inadequate with their nutrition choices, but you would want to educate them as to the importance of carbohydrates, but also get them to understand, or me to understand, why their reasoning is keto the reason for what they're doing. Most of the time, people will come back and say it's because it's for aesthetics reasons, because they do see that change in their body composition, particularly from less carbs. But then I always say to them, okay, well, aesthetics goals and performance goals cannot work hand in hand. And being on keto long term or even short term is going to impair your performance for CrossFit because you're not providing the required fuel for that sport. And then I would slowly educate. If they're still very, no, I just want to be keto, or I want to be, or come to the party and say, no, I want to try a little bit of carbohydrates, then it's just working towards trusting them and, having their, understanding improve over time, because I'm not just going to be able to convince them in one sitting that carbs are better for them. We need to get their trust, put it in their diet, get them to trial it, see how they go, and, adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, that was really nice. I was hoping you would be mean. I was hoping you were going to say, yeah, you're an idiot. You can forget about being a CrossFit champion, doing keto. You're an effing idiot. But you're all nice and politically correct. I hate it.
You're making my Aussie accent sound really bad if I was actually to answer like that.
Look, I haven't heard Aussie, I haven't heard a real Aussie accent in quite a while. You're really Aussie. It's nice,
really?
though. It's nice. I like it.
Okay,
Producer Shane, you like it? Yeah, we got a thumbs up over here. Big fan of the Aussie, and that's some Queensland shit right there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, I really wanted to talk about what you eat after. We've talked about the importance of carbohydrates, particularly for athletic performance. What do you recommend people eat? Okay, I've got to be specific, don't I? So what do you recommend people who are looking to gain muscle have after their workouts?
Yeah. So when it comes to, gaining muscle, the principles of recovery and nutrition are still really important. So we still want to make sure that you are having carbs and protein, and both those two together, because obviously carbs will help replenish, the stores that you've just burnt, and then protein is there to assist with, recovery and damage to the muscles themselves with the training adaptation. A lot of people you'll see in the fitness industry will slam the fact that they need to get a post-workout protein shake within 30 to 60 minutes. That's very outdated now, because evidence shows with with training, resistance training and trying to put on muscle, you have the ability to putting on muscle for the next 24 to 48 hours after a resistance bound training session. So you can now see the importance of, I need that protein shake, 6 minutes or 36 minutes prior to training doesn't become as important as the next bouts of protein that you require for the next 48 hours. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, with the surplus of building muscle, you do want it to be coming from making sure you do have resistance training, adequate carbohydrates and protein to support that, and being in a slight surplus too will obviously be beneficial for that.
Yeah, right. So, okay, now let's say you are looking to get in shape, lose weight. And what would you want to eat after a workout?
So depending on when it is, for me, I always try smoothies. So I don't know if anyone else notices it with training, and it'll depend on the type of training that you do, right? But for CrossFit and that sort of stuff, even with trying to put on muscle with a strength component, I get appetite reduction, and that's a byproduct of training. So sometimes people will lose their appetite after training, and that's got to do with the training adaptations as well as hormonal changes. But what we want to make sure is that it's something that you consume relatively, within 90 minutes. So I would do a smoothie, or otherwise I'd lead into the next meal. So if I'm training in the morning, breakfast will suffice. If I'm training in the afternoon, and then I finish around 6 or something, then going into dinner is going to be fine as well. Making sure that, predominantly most of your plate, as per se, has a fair amount of carbohydrates, a good combination of, protein, some fats, and then obviously lots of vegetables as well.
Yeah, so you're kind of saying instead of having that big protein shake that you would want to have, for building muscle, just look to get to the next meal and have your sit-down meal, because it's kind of like get to the cupcake, get to the batter. Yeah. Instead of going with the protein, like what you were saying before, the protein shake would be the stuff on top of the cupcake in your analogy, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people forget that just like anything, the dose is a poison with everything. You can have too much protein, you can have too much water. So you just want to find that sweet spot for the individual and getting them to understand that if you just go to the next meal, you're ticking 2 boxes. You're getting everyday nutrition and you're getting, that's the 10% of your pre and post-training nutrition already sorted.
Yeah, that's awesome. I learned a bunch of stuff when I was working with you, but something that I had no idea about was eating fat directly after your workout slows down the digestion so that all the nutrients that you're consuming aren't getting to where they need to go as soon as they possibly could. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's not saying that you don't want to have fat. It's just too much fat slows down the digestion overall. And we know that when you combine macronutrients, so for example, when you have a meal, because it's made up of carbs, fats, and proteins, altogether that's going to be digested slowly based on the macronutrient components itself. But fat is one of those ones that you don't want to necessarily have too much post-training, because we do want to make sure that our recovery purposes can happen relatively quickly, particularly if you're training the next morning. So if we're talking about the afternoon here, you've got less recovery time compared, you've got maybe 10, 12 hours until you train again, compared to someone who's got a full 24 hours because you might train the following afternoon. So that meal that you have, for dinner, for example, if a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of fats here is fine. I'm not saying that you want to be like a keto style dinner, because that's definitely not going to be advantageous for a recovery purpose, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting to consider that fat does slow down digestion in general. And if you finish a big workout and your body is crying out for nutrients, the best thing would be to do is to get a banana and I don't know, a banana and some chicken breast. What did you say?
I actually said chocolate milk. Chocolate milk's a great recovery.
I wanted to talk to you about this because Royce Dunne always posts chocolate milks, and I'm like, what the hell? Because most people will be like, that's unhealthy. But we're talking about a person who works out 6 hours a day. But I want to hear sell me on chocolate milk.
Yeah, so chocolate milk obviously has a good ratio of carbs and protein. It's probably not as high in the protein component, but if he's going to be getting to a meal after the chocolate milk pretty quickly, then that's fine. Another interesting thing about your chocolate milk is it's got electrolytes in it too. So it's great for because when you sweat, obviously when we sweat, we're not just losing sweat itself, we're losing our electrolytes through sodium and that sort of stuff. And it's a quick and easy option. Do you know what I mean? Another good option. I don't know if you guys have it in America, Butter's Milo, like Milo and milk. That's also a good option.
Right.
But like I said, for the everyday individual, I'm not saying you can't have that. But like you said, you could go for a yogurt, for example, and some bananas. I know you're the person who'd go for like some meat and banana. That's completely fine. But most people would go for like yogurt and banana is fine, or you could go
Where
for
are,
like.
where are the electrolytes in chocolate milk?
So it's the recovery aspect of how it's actually made. Do you know what I mean? So it's the combination of when it's like processed and that sort of stuff too. So most of the time, I mean, you can get it from water. Like if you just literally have water, you're getting that, but then also you're not getting sodium. So you could have water and say pretzels would be a good option because there is salt coming in from that. But the more important aspect, I guess, of chocolate milk is because it fucking tastes great. And then you have, your carbs and your proteins too. But it's good to get it down there and then. So with the boys, obviously, it's a good option because like Royce will have a fair amount of it, and then he'll just lead into another meal.
Yeah, I mean, and we're talking about people who aren't looking to like necessarily gain muscle or lose weight. We're talking about athletes who are fueling up for the next time they work out and replenishing their bodies after the work that they've just done, right?
Yeah. Essentially, yeah.
Love it. I want to know so I got a couple of questions from tennis players. What about like sports like running, tennis? What's best to eat before and after, long bouts of cardio?
So one thing I probably want to stress when it comes to more endurance style training is it's more important, and depending how long it is too, right? Tennis games can be quite long if you're doing, running, depending on half marathons, an example. What you eat throughout the day is almost just as important as what you eat during the session, because obviously endurance is long and demanding and it's steady state. So your body might be churning through more, carbohydrates and fats. So if you eat shit throughout the day and then you just have your pre-training, then you're going to have a shit training session regardless. Do you know what I mean? So the same principles still apply in terms of carbohydrate rich and low digestion and low fiber. And the reason why, because what we see with endurance and particularly tennis, because you see the way that they move their bodies, is we want to make sure that their carbohydrate choices aren't anything that's going to upset their guts, because they're in different positions. So they're more of, I don't know what position tennis players are in, but like twisting, and they're always like a low squat stance. Do you know what I mean? So we don't want anything that's too heavy or going to cause stitches. So that's something that you'd want to work with the individual one-on-one, because they might just prefer just liquid carbs. So for example, some juice, or they might want Gatorade, or they might want fruit purees, those types of foods, compared to runners who can sometimes prefer just gels, lollies, dates, and that type of thing as well.
Yeah. That's super interesting. Wait, because I skipped this, I really wanted to talk about it. I really want to talk about supplementing. And I know that you, like you just mentioned, the cupcake analogy, the batter is really important. Like the main bit is really important. You get that down, that's the most important bit. But I want to talk about all those goodies, those supplements on top. If you're looking to fuel a workout, to perform athletically at your best, what supplements are you getting your athletes to take?
Yeah. So most of the time with these, the ones for strength and conditioning we recommend are, creatine monohydrate, beta-alanine, and caffeine. So those ones have got not just the most evidence, but for the sports that I work with are pretty profound. And I'll start with creatine monohydrate because that's one that has a lot of benefits, particularly for the strength and conditioning. So creatine monohydrate, we naturally produce in our body. However, the reason why we supplement is because we don't have enough to yield the benefits of it, if that makes sense. So for those who don't really know what creatine does, it basically has a role in regulation of energy production and acts indirectly to supply our body with ATP. So for those of you who don't know what ATP is, it's adenosine triphosphate. It's our body's preferred fuel currency. So when you go from sitting and you need to sprint, that's our body is, utilizing ATP to do that. So we have limited stores of that. But what creatine can do if you supplement it is it potentially can increase creatine stores, can potentially enhance fatigue resistance and lead to performance benefits for those intensity-based exercise, if that makes sense. you only want to get creatine monohydrate. There's other versions on, the market that's available, but the most evidence for it is just pure creatine monohydrate. It's quite cheap too, which is awesome. Sometimes it can be in pre-workouts and that sort of thing too. I would say it's just better off having it by itself because you don't need half the crap that comes in a pre-workout as well. And I think I've spoke to you about before, but there is a dose, dose amount that is recommended for most individuals. It's 3 to 5 grams, can be taken virtually whenever you want. It's important though with any supplement, guys, just to check, obviously with your healthcare professional, because some people, breastfeeding probably shouldn't take it. Pregnant women, if you've got any pre-existing kidney issues, but then generally the health population is fine to have. So that's a pretty interesting one. I love that one. If you start taking creatine, don't freak out if you're like, oh, I see a scale increase, because it naturally draws more water into the cell. That will level out over time, but the benefits far outweigh the freak out of the scale going up, if that makes sense. For that. So it's made for, explosive activities, which is great. So that's the first one. The second one is...
I've got questions about creatine. Don't you dare. I want to know... does the size of the individual, does it matter how much? Should you be taking, like, as a bigger person like me, I'm 100 kilos, should I be taking more creatine than, say, you take?
Not necessarily. There is like a loading phase you can do, which suggests that it just basically gets into the, muscles quicker. So if you want it to be more advantageous, you can do that. But the general evidence still sticks between 3 to 5 grams for the maintenance phase. The reason why I don't do the loading phase, because it's like 20 to 25 grams that you've got to take 4 times a day. And like, who the fuck has time to take that powder like that? I mean, you can, but the maintenance and then just remembering it, right? So when I do my creatine, I just put it in with my, water or my cordial that I have with my training, and I chuck my creatine, my beta-alanine, and all that in. With the loading phase, you don't want to do it for very long at all. But, then you go to maintenance. But it's something that maintenance is just so much easier. And then it's just always a saturation in your cell, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then making the most of that ATP that you get from added ATP that you get from creatine. When should we be taking it? Before workouts, after workouts? Should we be sipping during?
There's not really a lot of evidence to suggest that you need to take it at a specific time. There is some evidence to say with carbohydrates, but I just take it with training because mine's just more, I'm going to forget. And also, if I'm going to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, the last thing I want to be taking is creatine. Do you know what I mean? So you can put it in a shake in the morning too. Some of my athletes, I'll get them to do that. But honestly, it's fine in terms of when you take it. I would just say whatever's more convenient for you.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. You can go ahead with the Beta-Alanine now. I want to hear all about
it. So that one is amino acid produced in the body naturally as well. Oh, actually, with creatine, so people who benefit from it are going to be women, and then also vegans too, because of the fact that they don't have meat consumption. I just want to put that in there. But beta-alanine, back to that one, sorry, like I said, is an amino acid produced in our body. And it's important, without getting too sciencey, but I kind of need to explain it a little bit, for the production of a protein called carnosine, which basically acts as a buffer to soak up acid byproducts during intense exercise. So when you get that lactic acid buildup, essentially beta-alanine helps with reducing that, because that lactic acid buildup is a byproduct of hydrogen ions because of the increased acidity within the muscle, or essentially decrease in the muscle's pH. Which can cause fatigue and impaired performance. Like, great example, like air-dyne sprints. You just can't keep doing them. So the carnosine from the beta-alanine, for example, acts by soaking up those hydrogen ions to regulate your muscle pH, and then hopefully increase your fatigue resistance and potentially increase training capacity and performance. The one thing with beta-alanine, for anyone who's tried it, and it's always in pre-workouts, but I always get it by itself, is that itchy skin that you can get from pre-workouts.
Yeah,
so that's a byproduct. Yeah, and some people can be more sensitive. Some people can tolerate it. Obviously, if you're more sensitive to it, you don't want to have the higher doses. You would start the lower dose, because most of the dosage is around 2 to 5 grams is the benefit for it. So I would suggest, like for me, I can't take too much of it. I remember I first took some when I was freaking on stage, and I took some for beta-alanine. And man, I was on stage trying to pose and smile, and I fucking felt like I was just getting attacked by ants, and it was like the worst thing. And I went super, super red because I was like so stressed. So I was like, my experience with Beta-Alanine from that point always like is like kind of like, scarred me a little bit.
Yeah. But why were you? But you're doing like a physique competition, like you're flexing, and you were taking Beta-Alanine.
Yeah, so my understanding for it from back then was it's to help like from like well you are still like because you're depleted from carbohydrates, you still have carbs coming in, but you still got to like tense and hold these poses for a long time. So for anyone who's never done it, it's actually a pretty stressful routine. Do you know what I mean? Because you got to stand there and tense and like abs on the entire time. But it was from the coach gave it to me. This was years ago, and then I was like, I'm never doing that again ever because I was like, oh yeah, just give me that shit. That's fine. I didn't realize how much I took. I didn't even know how much I had, and it was so itchy.
Yeah. Oh my God, I really want to talk to you. I really want to talk to you about like those days. I mean, it was only 2018. It wasn't that long ago that you were up on a stage flexing and all that. But the other thing is like you say, like it's stressful. It's actually difficult. Aren't you kind of water depleted as well? Like you kind of stop drinking water 48 hours to 24 hours before you pose?
Some people would do that. I didn't do that. So I just obviously reduced my carbohydrate intake coming in because obviously you're trying to essentially get as lean as possible. And then carbohydrate loading to pump up because whilst you're lean and depleted, if you're just to get up on stage, the whole point of the category that I was in is that you need to still have muscularity as well as look lean, essentially. So if you are too depleted, then you're not going to have that definition or muscularity perspective. So then carb load, and then it helps you with the pump up, so then you look more full, if that makes sense. But it's a very, I would never do it again. I probably wasn't as committed as like there's kudos to individuals who do it because I was running a full clinic, and I'm not saying my stress is more stressful than anyone else's, but I probably didn't take it as seriously as what I should have. But I still did okay, but I didn't come in as lean as what I should because I was like, for fuck's sake, I can't be bothered being 100% on this all the time. So I was still quite big for the size, but I wasn't as lean as what I should have been. But that's, it's a learning curve. I appreciate a lot of individuals doing it, but I'll probably never do that ever again. And the tan was insane.
Yeah, that terrible tan. But also, it does look stressful. Like it doesn't look like I've had a few friends recently do it, including my friend Dr. Fit Fabulous. Your client Jessica Coughlan just did it.
Oh yeah, she's phenomenal.
I mean, she's amazing. I mean, she's an incredible CrossFit athlete too, and now she's doing these physique competitions, and they look. I mean, their muscles look great, but their faces like lean up, like they don't have anything under their chin. And I almost want to give them a hug and like take them for a meal.
Yeah, it is a very difficult
their muscular at the same time. It's very strange. Like in the face, I want to take care of them, and in the body, they look,
insane.
Aggressive.
Yeah, Jess is a phenomenal athlete. She's done really well. To give people a bit of background, was previous gymnastics, full-time CrossFit, and then delved down into IFBB to try and compete in that just for something different. And she actually did really well. But yeah, it is a very grueling process. And, it's not just even the side of like getting lean, it's then the psychological issues that you have with it too. And making sure, that you've got good support network because most females and athletes, in general, have a difficulty with staying, like they want to stay that lean. And comp lean isn't normal. Do you know what I mean? Like it can't be maintained to that degree of severity. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk about that for a minute? Because you mentioned carb loading so you kind of deplete your body of all carbohydrate to get rid of the water. And then on competition day or when it's time to get up there and flex, you eat carbs. Yeah.
So you don't fully deplete, depending on how your strategy is. Yeah, depending on how your strategy is and how you like where you are with and how much severity you might need to do for that, because the individual and where you are for body comp is going to be totally different. But essentially, you do want to provide yourself with more carbohydrates, and like I said, to get that kind of swole look, but also to help you perform when you are on stage, particularly if you are doing a routine or anything, because you're going to need that. Because carbs aren't just for performance; they're also cognitively as well, right? So, if you're quite depleted, and carbohydrate intake is needed for that too. And they're relatively low low fiber too, because if you've come in and done a low res or low fiber diet and carb diet coming into that comp, you don't want to have too high fiber, because that's also going to cause gut issues. And if you're going to get up on stage and you need to be lean through your midsection, or lean everywhere, to be honest, but particularly through your midsection, and you have something that's high fiber, you're going to bloat. So then that bloating is going to be like disadvantage for yourself up on stage against the other girls.
What are sources of carbohydrates that are low fiber?
So that's when you're looking at like your things like your toast, your white rice, cereal, all that type of thing. You still want a little bit of protein with that too, but like you wouldn't be having like a full chicken, rice and vegetable meal. I mean, you could, but depending on how much, that would be low fiber. And also because you've got to realize you've eaten less food, right? So essentially that coming into that week, you may not be, your food volume in your gut and your gut would have reduced because you're not eating as much food as what you originally started in prep potentially. So you're also going to make sure the food you're choosing is not just low in fiber, but it's low in size, because the last thing you want to be doing is eating a massive meal and then you've got to go on stage, because that's going to be problematic as well.
Yeah, right. But let's talk about this for a minute, because I do want to talk about the aesthetic side of what to eat and what not. Let's talk about gaining muscles to look great, which is what we've worked together on. Is it necessary to eat more than you usually would to go into a calorie surplus? Is it always necessary to go into a calorie surplus to gain muscle?
Not necessarily, but it is more beneficial. Do you know what I mean? Like if you want, particularly on a base, actually it comes down more so to your training age as well. Like if you're an individual who is a newly trained resistant athlete, so just started the gym, you're going to be putting on muscle regardless, because your body hasn't been exposed to that type of training before. But then if you're someone like Royce, for example, it would be harder for him to put on muscle because his body's very used to that training style and that training adaptations. But in saying that, essentially, yes, being in a surplus, the more aggressive you go in a surplus, I guess the more likelihood you have of putting on body fat, because you don't want, like, it's really hard to put on muscle. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not just as simple as, oh, I put a kilo on, so I put a kilo of muscle on. It doesn't work like that. But it takes time because it's a very lengthy process, right? So I always say to people, you know, and it comes with putting on weight too. So I'm always more on the conservative side, because, you know, individuals struggle within my realm of sports because it's unfortunately shouldn't be about aesthetics, but most CrossFitters have a very aesthetic attachment to themselves. So putting on weight sometimes for those types of individuals can be very stressful for them. So we want to do it in a way that's slow and steady, that wins the race, that they can adapt to it. And they can, you know, understand opposed to being like, go hard, go home, which is more likely to put on more body fat.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Like, I did notice when I was adding, I was like I almost ate twice as much as I normally would. And I did notice that abs are the first thing that go, because you get, you know, you're puffy and you're full of water. Is that the only way in order to do this, especially if you're going to go ahead and be like, you know, I don't know, if you want to look great on camera, you want to look like Hugh Jackman and Wolverine, you want to be a physique person. Is the bulking and then shredding thing, that's the route that you usually take?
It can be, or you might just be naturally one of those individuals with a genetic predisposition who tend to be okay on either side. So it depends on how your body will adapt. But if you're trying to, like for yourself, let's just say you had to put on some weight for a role, you had to put a muscle and, you know, size. Essentially, you'd want to bulk for a little bit and see how you go, and then we'd not strip, but not like as a massive deficit, but pull back to see how your body adapts to that. Because most individuals always want abs, but abs are one of those things that are more genetically predisposed to an individual. So you see those people have six packs who'll walk around all the time regardless of what they eat, and then you see people who, you know, as soon as they find that they eat excessive amounts of calories, that their abs go straight away. It just depends from that aspect. But it's always about working with the individual, what you think is going to be best for you. We found that works, like, because you put on size and you needed to put on size and performance, like in terms of being able to do well. And then we pulled you back a little bit. And then when you came into that acting role, remember, we were like, okay, well, you need to look a little bit lean. So we'll try like a low fiber, low res diet the week of, and it does help.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I want to talk about that, the shredding portion. I guess that's what you call it. Bulking. Is it bulking and shredding? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to talk about that a little bit. You know, what does that usually take? A slight calorie deficit, or are you really looking at carbohydrate? You know, taking back carbohydrates because they contain water in order to shred. What does that usually entail?
So shredding in terms of if you're going to lose fat or anything is always about initiating a calorie deficit. So first and foremost, but for everyday individuals, this is when I would say what matters most compared to intermediate full-on athletes is total calories are really important. Then your next would be keeping your protein moderately high. And then how you choose to have your carbs and fats is kind of irrelevant. Do you know what I mean? So you can have whatever's remaining from your calories, you can have a bit more carbs or you can have more of a higher fat diet. Doesn't really matter as long as those total calories and then proteins are being met for those individuals, because it's not as heavily performance based. In saying that, as a recreational person, you can still make those carbs and fats, prioritize a little bit around your training and then a little bit post training and then wherever else you want them. But for most individuals, it's best to focus, over that calorie deficit, total calories, protein, fats, and carbs where they please or where it sits for them.
Yeah, that's what I learned working with you. I'd say the biggest thing that I took away was, okay, other than carbs not being a bad thing, was making sure that I got good protein about, because I fast, I don't eat all morning, and then I have big protein lunch, big protein afternoon tea, and a big protein dinner. And that's when I really saw that everything, other than when we gained weight, but that's when I really saw muscles start to pop, was making sure that protein was like prioritized and also eaten over time.
Yeah, and also resistance training. I'll add that in because in a deficit for training, resistance training obviously helps. Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. That is worth mentioning. I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about, fueling workouts that are first thing in the morning. A lot of people get up, get out of bed and go and work out, which I just think is insane. It's not for me. But what is the best way that, we're talking about people who get up out of their bed, I don't know, go get on the Peloton or, go 10 minutes down the road to a gym. What are they, what can they do to make sure that they're fueled?
So ideally with that, you can have liquid carbohydrates is what I would use. So whether they have fruit purees or, you can go for fruit juice if you want to be a little bit more fancy because you can do dextrose too, which is just carbohydrates broken down in a simple form as a supplement. They're more for people who've got their batter of their cake sorted first. Otherwise, a serve of fruit is fine. All those things are going to be more easily digestible. It's just more or you can even do a piece of toast. It's just how much you're willing to really get up earlier to then go towards having something like that in the morning, if it makes sense.
Yeah, totally. What do you think about working out fasted? Are there pros? Are there cons?
I knew you were going to love this question. So intermittent fasting, for those, there is pros and cons. So if you're just an everyday person, doesn't really want to worry too much about performance, you can train fasted and then, your post-training meal probably needs to happen a bit more quicker than someone who's fed, if that makes sense, because you haven't had anything. There can be pros for individuals who like intermittent fasting because of the fact that it helps them regulate their day a bit better. Some people just don't like having to have breakfast. If you're an office worker and you do minimal activity, you might find that it's easier for you to manage and those types of things, or you just generally might enjoy doing it. The thing I would suggest if you are going to do it and you are going to work out is not to work out when you're fasting. You want to be doing that when it's in your fed state, because particularly if it's strength conditioning or that style of training, you're kind of counterproductive if performance is your goal, if that makes sense, because it's kind of going against it. If you said to me, am I a fan of intermittent fasting? I would say no. The reason why is because the population that I deal with, majority of them have an unhealthy relationship with food, and their intention as to why they're using intermittent fasting is not what it's initially there for. Does that make sense? Intermittent fasting is a great tool. That's all it is, to create a calorie deficit. Does that make sense? But evidence has shown it's no more better than any other diet that does help with weight loss, if that makes sense. But it can work for others and it can be horrible for other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And I do want to talk about this because I love the stuff you post, particularly around people disordered eating. And I know I've struggled with, I guess, disordered eating, or at least the way that I view food, viewing food as, if I eat food that's considered bad, then I want to punish myself with working out or, think less of myself when I eat food that's bad. Let's talk a little bit about disordered eating and how you came to get passionate about it.
I think within the CrossFit community, it's heavily prominent. So you can see that whole aesthetics and the performance are kind of mixed. So a lot of people want the performance goals, but their disordered eating patterns are like, no, I don't want to gain weight. I want to stay as lean as I can. I should be touching carbohydrates. So all those patterns are, I guess, more disordered eating behaviors. And the problem is, and the reason why I got a lot more passionate about it is because when people come in and see me, I care about their intent as to what they're doing things for, because that describes a lot about what's going on with their current nutrition intervention or their current nutrition behaviors. Because if they're doing it for the wrong reasons, we then need to re-educate them to understand their reason as to why it's not ideal to be doing things this way, and also working on their relationship with food, because there's a lot of noise, like we spoke about at the start, with what is considered, people will classify food as good and bad. And essentially there's no such thing as foods that are good or bad, only ones, bad foods are ones that are toxic and you're allergic to and all that sort of shit. But other than that, food is food. It has no moral value in terms of the fact that, it can fit in an overall part of our diet from a healthy and balanced perspective. And that's the kind of information I always want people to understand, because the moment you start having rigid food rules, you then start falling down that trap of the behaviors associated with disordered eating, and then your potential risk of that then turning into further consequences of decreased health and well-being. So when you have issues like that, you want to determine with the individual what their main cause was to be like that. So for example, yourself, you might be like, I had a shit day at work, so then I've gone home and I've binged on junk food, because food is fuel, but it also has so much more to that. It's an emotional attachment for many, an emotional connection. So it's then trying to determine why their coping mechanism has been food, and then breaking that down and coming up with suitable interventions. So most of the time with this style of, concern, it's a multiple disciplinary team approach. So you should be working with a dietitian, you should be working with a psychologist, because this can then increase your risk of eating disorders down the track. So I'm really passionate about it because of the whole, body image, noise around you should be this type of thing, you should be this type of aesthetics in CrossFit, and we know that aesthetics and performance don't go hand in hand. So I'm very much about creating, a healthy understanding and your intentions as to why you're doing something. And if it's for ill cause, and you may not know it's that, it's just redirecting your thought patterns so that you can have food overall and enjoy it from a health and wellness perspective, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So what
That's
are the
very
behaviors
long-winded
that
answer.
No, I like it. It's great. I want to know, what are behaviors that people should look out for to understand whether they have maybe a disordered eating pattern?
Yeah, so it's usually, there'll be compulsive eating, there'll be restrictive eating, like they could be doing intermittent fasting because they are scared of eating food after a certain time because they feel like they're going to be gaining weight. It can be that they need to exercise for the calories that they've just consumed from a bad food that they consider bad food, over-exercising, under-eating, purging, there's a whole collection of what could be considered. So those are factors that we kind of pick up on. If they have food rules, obviously, rigid food rules, like I won't eat these because they're not classified as clean. Or these foods are like, I won't eat, I'll only have them on the weekends, or I'll save my calories up and then I'll, eat them back and eat most of my calories. So things that aren't classified as, I guess, normal eating routines or patterns. And because of the fact that any of those, I guess, examples could then lead to further health consequences down the track too.
Yeah, I mean, I did find it interesting when we were working together because I'd never logged my food, or I'd never noted what I was eating. It was absolutely interesting and fascinating to me. But is there a way to log, if we're going to be counting calories, or we have a really specific goal in mind and we're going to be doing that we don't get disordered about it?
Yeah, so I guess when I'm first assessing an individual, if I think that they have issues around that, then tracking will never be an option because it's going to do more detriment to them and it's not going to be serving them. It's going to be hurting them. I always like to say to someone, if your nutritional strategy is causing you stress, we need to find something that's new because it's not forming a healthy relationship with food. And that can be hard for someone to identify. But always remember when you are tracking can be a great tool. Don't get me wrong. Like, it teaches an individual a lot about their food. But we only ever want to use it for education purposes. And we also want to be mindful that it's not a permanent thing. It's only there to educate you. So I think it's important to understand too, that when we are tracking that, food labeling can have up to 30% error. So we're never going to be able to be 100% accurate with anything that we know. And we just want to take it as a grain of salt. And when I'm telling people to track like you, I was like, okay, just, focus on hitting your protein, your carbs and your fats. Make sure you have a good amount of fiber. Don't worry so much about your vegetables because, they don't have minimal calories. It's not like you need to be worrying about to that degree by any means anyway. And you don't need to track exactly to the gram. So if I said to you, you need 200 grams of steak or whatever, and someone, you got like 210, I wouldn't really care. But if you're a person like, no, it needs to be 200, it has to be only this, then I'm like, okay, now we're starting to have red flags, that it could be potentially like not ideal for your health and mental capacity.
Yeah, got it. Well, that's really good. I'm glad we got to talk about that. I had a number of questions from women with PCOS about how to lose weight. When a person has that condition, how do you usually deal with a client with PCOS?
So Pcos I just call it Pcos for short, is one that you just got to be really careful with how you communicate to an individual and the language that you use. Pcos itself, when a person has that condition, it will naturally be harder for them to lose weight, and they might have a higher weight, and their BMR might be, so basal metabolic rate, maybe potentially lower. So essentially what that means is the metabolic rate may be lower. So that collectively overall means it may be harder or more difficult for those women to lose weight. So when I have individuals coming in and you can see that they're quite distressed because they've tried all these factors, my first thought to them is like, okay, maybe weight loss is not the best thing that we should be focusing on because I can see that's causing you a lot of mental distress. Let's reframe this and let's focus on something on like, okay, your performance, and their mindset changes a little bit because you've got to be very careful because they might already start to have signs of disordered eating because they're fixated so much on weight loss. But the problem is most of the time people don't really understand PCOS well. So doctors, and not saying doctors, but people can diagnose it and, don't really, and then the individual doesn't really understand it that well. So therefore they're just slamming weight loss and not realizing that certain symptoms of PCOS can make that, more difficult, and because they have a lower metabolic rate and that type of thing too. So once they have that better understanding of the condition itself, I think they feel a little bit more comfort towards it. But in general, when it comes to PCOS, the same principle applies. Just like anything when it comes to wanting to lose weight, is that a deficit needs to be initiated first, so a calorie deficit first and foremost. And then from there, depending on the symptoms the person has with PCOS, because there's a range of symptoms, we don't need to go into that because that's quite detailed. Your interventions might be different based on what those symptoms are for the person. But generally, overall, what we want to see is a healthy foundation. Again, we want good quality carbohydrates, whole grains, lean proteins, plants, marine fats, and we want that spread throughout the day. It's also a bit of a focusing on the quality of the carbs over the quantity when it comes to PCOS. So we do want to make sure they're more minimally less processed and those types of things. But I'm not going to give an answer that they would have loved to hear because the evidence is still the standard for an calorie deficit. But also I would recommend working with a dietitian that specializes in that area so they can make sure that they're understanding and their behaviors around food can be monitored and targeted to make sure they're getting the best outcome.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Have you ever recommended inositol for people with PCOS?
Yeah, so there's a lot of evidence with that in terms of strong evidence for that for when it comes to regulating periods, the insulin and that sort of thing too. Again, it's not dose dependent. It's going to be dependent on the individual. Do you know what I mean? So because most of the time when we find people coming in with PCOS, they may not necessarily be eating the best anyway. So you always want to start with the basics, work towards that, figure out where we can make their general diet well, what their doctors are recommended and vice versa, and then supplementation if needed, and making sure that they have sound, anti-inflammatories in their diet and all that sort of stuff too. There is a lot of pros and with it. I'm not saying I don't know what it's like to feel like it because I definitely don't have it, but we do have a lot of individuals that we see in clinic. But just being very supportive and empathetic for someone going through Pcos because of the fact that naturally they, like I said, they find it more difficult to lose weight based on their BMI, sorry.
Yeah, love that. Thanks for talking about that. I want to hear about, you have an app, don't you? Bite Right?
Oh, yes.
What?
Yeah.
Come on,
Yeah.
you can spruik it on the show. Let's go.
Oh, thank you. So, Bite Right was an app that we've created from scratch, and it's currently the only one that I'm aware of on the market that's been designed by, dietitians, so my team and myself, where we take care of everything for you. So we don't give you your macros as per se, it's calorie based because we know your macros in the back end because we created every single recipe. And then we give a meal plan that suits your requirements based on your height, weight, activity levels, and your dietary exclusions. So for example, if you want to exclude anything meat-based for, obviously if you're a vegan, or if you're a person who just wants to exclude dairy, then the app caters for that. It also has 24/7 dietary and support for myself and my team. So we're on the chat function. So if an individual is unsure if their calories are good, and we check in every week, we're able to have that constant contact with an individual. And we only make sure, obviously, the team is qualified health professionals for that advice. It is roughly, I'm not really sure about American, but it's $9.99 Australian per week. And it gives you access to pre-training and a complete meal plan. Now, let's say, for example, it's something like breakfast is eggs on toast, and you're like, oh, I don't really want that. You can swap out a meal that suits your calorie and macro requirements to the, list of foods that we've given you. So let's just say it's 500 calories, and you swap it out, and it's going to swap with recipes and macros that suit those requirements for that meal. So we have gone far and beyond in terms of making sure that everything's taken care of for you, because I find individuals, they're either tracking, they want to fully track, or they just want a meal plan. There's nothing that's kind of in the middle, and we've taken care of that for you. So we don't want you to track your own macros and calories. We've literally done all the hard work. You've just literally got to choose the food to consume.
That's awesome. So are there recipes and stuff like that? Or is it like,
Yes.
It's like eggs on toast, but there are other recipes and things. I always see these decadent looking overnight oats with chocolate things, and I'm like, what is that? It looks...
So the recipes were all created from our end. I just gave eggs on toast as an example because that's a standard brekkie, but the recipes we make are quick and easy, and they're delicious meals. I can tell you now that my eggs on toast or my overnight oats do not look like that. I try to make them look as decorative as that, but it definitely doesn't. But they're made to be enticing, because a lot of people, when they're trying to do any dietary goal, you just see them eating chicken, broccoli, and rice. I'm not saying that's bad to eat, but over time it just gets boring. And food should be fun. It should be enjoyable. The whole point of Bite Right is it's 80%, wholesome food and 20% soul food. So it's made to have enjoyment foods, hence why you have some delicious recipes available, because we want to make sure that we're promoting, when we're helping with your dietary interventions, that it's a sustainable aspect. You're not eating chicken, broccoli, and rice for 3 or 4 meals a day. Not saying if people like that, that's completely fine. But majority of the population like variety.
Yeah, totally. Now, can Americans or people around the world also partake in Bite Right, or is it just for Aussies?
So Bite Right, we've allowed it to be available in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK, and America. And the reason why we've only chose those is because it's based on language. So the app is only obviously available in English. We are working towards converting that to different languages, but so far it's just available in those countries at the moment.
Taylor, it's been awesome talking. I never call you Taylor because in my head you're the sports dietitian, but it's been so nice talking. How do people find you? Is Instagram best?
Yeah. So they can find me on at @the_sports dietitian is my Insta. Spell it with a T, not a C, because Americans spell dietitian with a C. And also website or via email as well. And then for those who are interested in Bite Right, it's available on the Apple Store and Google Play.
I love it. I highly recommend reaching out to Taylor and her team for any questions that you have, disordered eating, Pcos, gaining weight, losing weight, all the questions. They really know what they're doing, and in particular Taylor. So Taylor, thanks so much for chatting with me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.